Subcommittee will come to order without objection. The chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. We welcome everyone to this first hearing of the Select Subcommittee. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Chair now recognizes himself for an opening statement. November 18th, 2021, an FBI whistleblower discloses to Republicans on the House Judiciary that the FBI created a threat tag for parents voicing their concerns at school board meetings. April 26, 2022, another FBI whistleblower discloses that the FBI employees are being run out of the Bureau for attending conservative political events. May 11th, 2022, another FBI whistleblower discloses that dozens of parents with the threat tag designation to their name are investigated by the FBI. This also happens to be the same whistleblower who said the FBI leadership, not the rank and file members, the FBI leadership is rotted at its core. His clearance has been revoked and he's been suspended. June 7th, 2022, another FBI whistleblower is retaliated against after giving feedback on an anonymous survey. July 27th, 2022, another FBI whistleblower discloses that agents are pressured to reclassify cases as domestic violent extremism cases to hit self-created performance metrics. September 14th, 2022, an FBI whistleblower discloses that the FBI views the Betsy Ross flag as a terrorist symbol. September 19th, 2022, another FBI whistleblower discloses that the Washington field office is deliberately manipulating January 6 case files to make it appear that domestic violence extremism is on the rise. He's been suspended. November 4th, 2022, another FBI whistleblower discloses the FBI accepts private user information from Facebook without the user's consent, and information is from only the conservative side of the political spectrum. This is only a sampling. In my time in Congress, I have never seen anything like this. Dozens and dozens of whistleblowers, FBI agents coming to us talking about what's going on, the political nature at the Justice Department. Not Jim Jordan saying this, not Republicans, not conservatives, good, brave FBI agents who are willing to come forward and give us the truth. And this is just the FBI. Americans have concerns about the double standard at the Department of Justice. Americans have concerns about the Disinformation Governance Board that the Department of Homeland Security tried to form. Americans have concerns about the ATF and what they're doing to the Second Amendment. And of course, they have concerns about the IRS and the thousands of new agents who are coming to that organization. And finally, there are concerns about what we've learned in the Twitter files, where big government and big tech colluded to shape and mold the narrative and to suppress information and censor Americans. Over the course of our work in this committee, we expect to hear from government officials and experts like we have here today. We expect to hear from Americans who've been targeted by their government. We expect to hear from people in the media. And we expect to hear from the FBI agents who have come forward as whistleblowers. We think many of them will set for transcribed interviews, as one did on Tuesday. And we believe several of them will come and testify in open hearings. And finally, we expect to bring forward legislation that will help protect the American people. We hope our Democrat colleagues will work with us. The day the resolution creating this select committee was debated and passed, though, Mr. Jeffries, Mr. Nadler said Democrats would, quote, fight us tooth and nail. We hope that attitude changes. We want to work with them. Protecting the First Amendment shouldn't be partisan. Protecting the Constitution shouldn't be partisan. And protecting the fundamental principle of equal treatment under the law should not be partisan. With that, I yield to the ranking member for her opening statement. Mr. Schellenberg, I want to go to Twitter Files Part 7. I related a lot of what you put in there in my opening statement. And I want to give you as much time as you want, because I'm going to read the very first sentence, because something jumped out at me when I read the first sentence. In Twitter Files number 7, the FBI and the Biden laptop. You say this: how the FBI and intelligence community discredited factual information about the Biden foreign business dealings both after and before the New York Post revealed the contents of his laptop on October 14th, 2020. And what kind of jumped out at me was the way you framed it, because you did it backwards from what it's normally said. Normally you would say, the sentence would read, foreign business dealings both before and after. But I assume you did that for a reason, because in fact, I think the next sentence, you say social media companies discredit leaked information about Hunter Biden before and after. You use the normal, customary way in the second sentence, but the first sentence strikes me as you were trying to emphasize the before component of that statement. And I want you to just walk us through why you said that, because when I read it, it certainly was an operation both before and after, as you said, after and before.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Reading through the whole sweep of events, I do not know the extent to which the influence operation aimed at pre-bunking the Hunter Biden laptop was coordinated. I don't know who all was involved, but what we saw was you saw Aspen and Stanford many months before then saying, don't cover the material in the hack and leak without emphasizing the fact that it could be disinformation. Okay, so they're priming journalists to not cover a future hack and leak in the way that journalists have long been trained to, with in the tradition of the Pentagon Papers, made famous by the Steven Spielberg movie. They were saying cover the fact that it probably came from the Russians. Then you have the former general counsel to the FBI, Jim Baker, the former deputy chief of staff to the FBI, both arriving at Twitter in the summer of 2020, which I find what an interesting coincidence. Then when the New York Post publishes its first article on October 14th, it's Jim Baker who makes the most strenuous argument within Twitter. Multiple emails, multiple messages saying this doesn't look real. There's intelligence experts saying that this could be Russian disinformation. He is the most strenuous person inside Twitter arguing that it's probably Russian disinformation. The internal evaluation by Yoel Roth, who testified in front of this committee, was that it was what it looked to be, which was that it was not a result of a hack and leak operation. And why did he think that? Because the New York Post had published the FBI subpoena taking the laptop in December of 2019, and they published the agreement that the computer store owner had with Hunter Biden that gave him permission after he abandoned the laptop to use it however he wanted. So there really wasn't much doubt about the provenance of that laptop. But you had Jim Baker making a strenuous argument. And then, of course, you get to a few days after the October 14th release, you have the President of the United States echoing what these former intelligence community officials were saying, which is that it looked like a Russian influence operation. Yeah. So they were claiming that the laptop was made public by a conspiracy theory. And the conspiracy theory that somehow the Russians got it, and they convinced Yoel Roth that they convinced him of this wild hack and leak story, that somehow the Russians stole it, got the information, gave it to the computer store, and it was bizarre. So you read that chain of events, and it appears as though there is an organized influence operation to pre-bunk.
Why? Why do you think they could predict the time, the method, and the person? Why could the FBI predict it? Not only did they predict it, they predicted it, so did the Aspen Institute. Yeah. Seemed like everyone was in the know saying, here's what's going to happen. We can read the future. How do you think they were able to do that?
I think the most important fact to know is that the FBI had that laptop in December 2019. They were also spying on Rudy Giuliani when he got the laptop and when he gave it to the New York Post. Now, maybe the FBI agents who were going to Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook and to Twitter executives and warning of a hack and leak, potentially involving Hunter Biden, maybe those guys didn't have anything to do with the guys that had the laptop. We don't know that.
I know.
But I have to say, as a newcomer to this, as somebody that thought it was Russian disinformation in 2020, everybody I knew thought it was Russian. I was shocked to see that series of events going on. It looked to me like a deliberate influence operation. I don't have the proof of it, but the circumstantial evidence is pretty disturbing.
It's pretty overwhelming. Thank you, Mr. Sheldon. We now recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Goldman, for 5 minutes.
So we're in way to end the hearing. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I want to thank
You know, we say this every hearing that we thank the witnesses, but, and I mean it every time, but I really mean it. Thank you for coming forward, sharing your story, and standing up for the Constitution, doing your duty. We appreciate it. Mr. Levitt, thank you for your representation of these individuals. We thank you for the powerful testimony that you gave and the way you gave it and the way you've conducted yourselves. And with that, without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for witnesses or additional materials for the record. Without objection, the hearing is adjourned. Chair now recognizes himself for an opening statement. Politics is driving the agenda in federal agencies. You don't believe me, just read the Durham report from 3 days ago. No probable cause, no predicate, no evidence whatsoever, but the FBI opened a case, took a dossier they knew was false, from a political campaign, from the Clinton campaign, to spy on a presidential candidate and American citizens. Here was the key line from the Durham report. Quote, the FBI failed to uphold their mission of fidelity to the law. They didn't follow the law. Didn't have probable cause or evidence to do what they did. An agency focused on politics. But I would argue today it's even worse. Because today it's not just presidential campaigns. Today it's the American people. They're the target. You're not politically correct. You're not in line with what they think should be the political position, the proper position. You're the target. Parents attending a school board meeting, pro-lifers praying at a clinic, or Catholics simply attending Mass, you could be a target. And maybe what's just as frightening is if you're one of the good employees in our government who come forward to talk about the targeting, you then become a target. You face retaliation. If you're one of those, and I think there are thousands and thousands of good employees working across our country in the FBI and other agencies, but if you're one of those good employees driven by your commitment to the Constitution and your conscience and you come forward, they're going to come after you. If you come forward and tell us about the radical traditional Catholic memo, you come forward and tell us about this idea that they're going to create some snitch line to report on parents going to school board meetings, you do that, they will try to crush you. They will retaliate against you. They're coming after you. But these guys today, they were brave enough. They took their oath seriously. They believe in the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the rule of law, and they came forward. And I want to thank them for doing it. But because they did, man, oh man, have they faced retaliation. Mr. O'Boyle was selected for a new unit, moved his family from Kansas to Quantico, Virginia, and the first day he arrives here, after being selected for this new unit, serving in our military, serving well in the FBI, with first day he arrives here, they tell him his clearance is suspended. Can't get his belongings for his family, can't get his clothes, can't get his children's clothes, 4 kids and a 2-week-old newborn. Mr. Friend raised concerns about using the SWAT team to arrest someone who was willing to turn themselves in, and the FBI takes his clearance. Wouldn't even let him get access to his firearms training records, which he needs to get employment. Mr. O'Boyle's went 200-some days without getting paid. Mr. Allen's went 450 days without getting paid. This is the kind of retaliation they have faced for coming forward and telling us the truth. For Mr. Allen, he lost his clearance for simply doing his job, compiling case-related research, using open-source material, news and articles, and passing them on to the people working the case. And they didn't like some of the material he passed on. 450 days without pay. And the retaliation isn't limited to the FBI. Democrats on this committee also engaged in it. They leaked parts of these guys' interviews to the press. Press reported on it, and then the press had to issue corrections. The Post, the Washington Post, the New York Times, Rolling Stone, because what the Democrats told them wasn't accurate, what they reported wasn't accurate. That's why Mr. Allen would only let Republicans talk to him. He said, I've seen what's going on. I want to be interviewed by the Republicans. We've talked to over 24 whistleblowers. People have come to us. We've interviewed several of those, and today 3 of them. 3 of those brave whistleblowers and a lawyer who represents them will tell us their story. They will tell us what happened, what they saw, and then what happened to them because they were courageous enough to report it to Congress. And I just want to tell you guys, get ready. Get ready, because these guys are going to come after you. You know they are. Last hearing we had two journalists, Democrats, two Democrat journalists sat right where you guys did, and these guys tried to get them to divulge their sources. Someone needs to tell them how the First Amendment works. And while Mr. Taibbi, one of those award-winning journalists sitting right where you're sitting, was testifying, guess what else was happening? The IRS was knocking on his door. So get ready. But I know you're up to the task because you came forward in the first place. Thank you for your commitment to the Constitution, the First Amendment, the rule of law, and for your willingness to come forward and tell Congress what you've seen, what you've witnessed. Thank you for doing that. Mr. Levitt, thank you for representing him. We appreciate that. Now I yield to the ranking member for an opening statement. I thank the gentleman. Mr. Durham, Carter Page is an American citizen who, Naval Academy grad, served our country. Why not just talk to him before you spy on him?
In this instance, I mean, I don't know if people looked at this in the report. There was a particular piece of information that had been given to Michael Isikoff and appeared in a Yahoo News article on September 23rd, in which Mr. Isikoff lays out what he's obviously been told, and it's clearly the information from Steele. But it also included a statement that a senior law enforcement official confirmed that Carter Page was on the radar screen. That matter was never referred for investigation as to who leaked that. This is an investigation that's supposed to be closely held, confidential, sensitive investigating, and that's never referred to, nobody ever looked at. Who's the senior law enforcement officer who gave the information to Michael Isikoff that Carter Page was on their radar screen? That's not number one.
Who do you think it was?
Chairman, the time is well expired. The witness could answer the question. You can't ask another one.
I appreciate the ranking member for pointing that fact out.
Okay, I'm not sure. Am I supposed to answer or not? Am I done?
I'll let you answer.
Oh, okay. So then, with respect to Carter Page, within 2 days of that article, wrote a letter to Director Comey saying, I didn't do the things that are suggested. I didn't meet with these people. I'm willing to sit down and talk to the FBI. You know, tell me when and where, essentially.
He offered to be interviewed. The gentlelady from Texas. Mr. Durham, in the summer of 2016, did our government receive intelligence that suggested Secretary Clinton had approved a plan to tie President Trump to Russia?
Yes.
Was that intelligence important enough for Director Brennan to go brief the President of the United States, the Vice President of the United States, the Attorney General of the United States, and the Director of the FBI?
Yes.
And was that intelligence put then into a memorandum, a referral memorandum?
Yes.
And was that memorandum then given to Director Comey and Agent Strzok?
That's who it was addressed to, yes.
Did Director Comey share that memorandum with the FISA court?
I'm sorry,
Did he share that memorandum with the FISA court? Did Director Comey do that?
I'm not aware of that if he did.
Did he share it with the lawyers preparing the FISA application?
Not to my knowledge.
Did he share it with the agents on the case, working the Crossfire Hurricane case?
No.
Didn't share it with the agents on the case. Can you tell the committee what happened when you took that referral memo and shared it with one of those agents, specifically Supervisory Special Agent Number 1?
We interviewed the first supervisor of the Crossfire investigation, the operational person. We showed him the intelligence information. He indicated he had never seen it before. He immediately became emotional, got up and left the room with his lawyer, spent some time in the hallway, came back.
He was ticked off, wasn't he?
Yes.
He was ticked off because this is something he should have had as an agent on the case. It's important information that the director of the FBI kept from the people doing the investigation.
The information was kept from him.
Who's Charles Dolan?
Charles Dolan is a public relations person here in Washington, D.C. He had prior involvement, professional involvement with Russian government, representing Russian government interests. He was a person that was associated with Igor Danchenko.
He was also buddies with the Clintons, wasn't he?
He had held positions when President Clinton was president.
In their campaign advisory to Secretary Clinton's presidential campaign, executive director of the Democrat Governors Association, that's the same Charles Dolan we're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, and wasn't he also a key source for information in the dossier?
He provided some information that was included in the
Ritz-Carlton
dossier, yes.
stuff, the Manafort stuff. In the Crossfire Hurricane investigation and the Mueller investigation, when the FBI interviewed Mr. Dolan, what did he have to say?
To my knowledge, they didn't interview Mr. Dolan.
They didn't interview this guy? Source for the dossier, key information in the dossier, buddies with the Clintons, they didn't talk to him?
No, I mean, we report on that because even Christopher Steele in October 2016 identified Dolan as somebody that might have information.
I find it interesting they didn't talk to him. Were there agents on the case who wanted to talk to Mr. Dolan, Mr. Durham?
Yes.
What happened to analyst number one? She kept pushing to talk to Mr. Dolan. She was ultimately turned down. What happened to her the day that she was turned down and said, no, we're not talking to Dolan? What happened to her?
At about the same time, she was assigned to a different project.
They moved her.
Investigation.
They said, we can't have this. We can't have that. We can't be looking into the Clintons' buddy, a key source for the dossier. They reassigned her. And then what did she do?
She memorialized it.
She entered a memo to the file because she said, at some point the inspector general is going to want to know this information. I'm going to make sure it's recorded contemporaneously. She put it in the file. It's crazy. They didn't talk to the key source. They kept key intelligence from the investigators. This is how bad this investigation was. But here's the scary part. I don't think anything has changed. The day your report came out, 5 weeks ago, May 15th, you got a letter, Mr. Durham, addressed to you from the general counsel at the FBI, Mr. Jason Jones, writes you this 6-page letter, and he says, not to worry, everything is fine. It's all been worked out at the FBI. He even says on page 2, he says, had the reforms implemented by current FBI leadership, summarized below, been in place in 2016, failures detailed in your report never would have happened, and he underlines it. He said this would never happen because of the reforms we implemented in 2019 and 2020. And then he says on page 4, one of the specific reforms, he says, FBI executive management has instructed investigations should be run out of the field and not from the headquarters. That statement is not true. 5 weeks ago, the FBI wrote you and said everything has changed when in fact it hasn't, and a statement in there is absolutely false, and we know it's false because 2 weeks ago today, we interviewed Stephen D'Antuono, former head of the Washington field office, Mr. Durham, and here's what he said in his transcript. Head of the Washington field office, when the Trump classified document investigation began, he said, that case was handled differently than I would have expected it to be, than any other cases handled. We learned a lot of stuff from Crossfire Hurricane, that headquarters should not work the investigation. It's supposed to be the field offices. My concern is that the Department of Justice was not following these principles. Nothing is, and that's the thing that scares me the most. Nothing has changed. Mr. Durham, I'm just finished with this. 60% of Americans now believe there's a double standard at the Justice Department. You know why they believe that? Because there is. That has got to change. And I don't think more training, more rules is going to do it. I think we have to fundamentally change the FISA process, and we have to use the appropriations process to limit how American tax dollars are spent at the Department of Justice. I yield back. Gentlelady from Texas. Chair is recognized for an opening statement. 3 years ago, in 11 months, July 24th, 2019, Bob Mueller sat in this room, in that chair, and told this committee, no collusion, no conspiracy, no coordination between President Trump and Russia. None. What the Democrats say? We don't care. We're going to keep going after President Trump. In fact, they didn't even wait one day. The next day, the phone call between President Trump and President Zelensky became the basis for their impeachment. Republicans said maybe instead of the never-ending attacks on President Trump, maybe the country would be better off if we figured out how the whole false Trump-Russia narrative started. After 2.5 years of the Mueller investigation, 19 lawyers, 40 agents, $30 million, where they found nothing, maybe we should figure out how the whole lie started. And that's exactly what Mr. Durham has done. In his report, he told us how the dossier was funded. He told us who funded it, how eager the FBI was to use it. how they put the dossier in a FISA draft application just 2 days after receiving it. He told us that not one single substantive allegation in the dossier was ever corroborated, ever validated, yet it was used to spy on an American citizen associated with the presidential campaign. He told us there was no proper predicate for opening the Crossfire Hurricane investigation, and maybe most importantly, he told us the FBI, the preeminent law enforcement agency in the world, failed in its fundamental mission of adherence to the rule of law. And unfortunately, I think once again, the Democrats will say, we don't care. It doesn't matter. We're never going to stop going after President Trump. In fact, 8 days ago, we saw how far they are willing to go with the indictment of President Trump. But frankly, this shouldn't surprise us. They told us their objective. In fact, it was an agent on the case of Crossfire Hurricane who told us what their objective was. We all remember the text message from Peter Strzok where he said, "Don't worry, we'll stop Trump." It started with the Crossfire Hurricane investigation. Mr. Durham has told us how wrong that was. Now we have an indictment of a former president who's winning in every single poll by his opponent's Justice Department. And in between those two events, we had the Mueller investigation, we had impeachment, we had 51 former intel officials falsely tell us the Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. We had a raid on President Trump's home, and of course we got Alvin Bragg's ridiculous case in New York. 7 years, nothing has changed. Don't believe me? We interviewed Stephen D'Antuono, former head of the Washington field office when the Trump classified document case began. Mr. D'Antuono told the committee, interviewed him just 2 weeks ago today. Mr. D'Antuono told the committee that when he asked the Department of Justice, why is there no U.S. attorney assigned to the Trump classified document case? Headquarters said, because we're running it. He suggested the Miami field office should do the raid. Instead of sending the folks from Washington field office down to Miami, have the folks in the Miami field office do it. Headquarters said no. He suggested there shouldn't be a raid. Instead, they should continue to work with President Trump's lawyers. Once again, headquarters said no. Mr. D'Antuono even said, how about when we get there? When we arrive at President Trump's home, we then call his lawyer and we do the search together. Again, headquarters said no. Another interesting fact, the lawyer who turned down Mr. D'Antuono's request happens to be the same person who is alleged to have pressured the attorney representing a Trump employee about a judgeship. Nothing has changed, and frankly, they're never going to stop. 7 years of attacking Trump is scary enough, but what's more frightening, any one of us could be next. In fact, it's already started. Parents at school board meetings are terrorists. Pro-life Catholics are extremists. Even journalists aren't safe. Federal Trade Commission, 13 letters. One of those letters to Twitter said, who are the journalists you're talking to? Think about that. They named 4 people personally. 2 come and testify in front of this committee. While they're in front of this committee, Democrats are asking them to reveal their sources, violate First Amendment principles. One of them, Matt Taibbi, while he's sitting at that table testifying to the Judiciary Committee, the IRS is knocking on his door. Parents, Catholics, journalists, but guess who gets it the worst? Guess who gets it the worst? Whistleblowers. If you dare come forward and tell Congress what's going on, look out. They will come for you. They will take your clearance. They will take your pay. They'll even take your kids' clothes. Just ask Garrett O'Boyle, who testified in front of this committee as well. Over the next few hours, we're going to hear the facts and details about the whole false Trump-Russian narrative, the Crossfire Hurricane investigation, and hopefully it will help change things at the Department of Justice. But regardless of what the Biden administration and the Garland Justice Department do, I know what Republicans in the House are committed to doing. We will work to dramatically change the FISA law, and we will do everything we can in the appropriations process to stop the federal government from going after the American people. Now recognize the ranking member for an opening statement. Director Wray, did the FBI ask financial institutions to turn over their customers? You yield the time to me. Did the FBI ask financial institutions to turn over their customers' debit and credit card purchase history in the Washington, D.C. area for January 5th and 6th, 2021?
I don't know the answer to that as I sit here right now.
Well, we do, because Bank of America gave us this email from the FBI to Bank of America.
Well, I am aware that Bank of America provided information to the FBI, but what communications occurred between the FBI and Bank of America about it?
Let's read it. To recap our morning call, we are prepared to action the following threshold. Customers transacting debit card, credit card, Washington, D.C. purchases between 1/5/21, 1/6/21. That's scary enough. But then the next bullet point's even more scary. Any historical, capital letters, all capitals, any historical purchase of a firearm. You guys asked financial institutions, at least Bank of America, we think more. Did you guys ask him?
Again, I don't have the full sequence of the back and forth. You've got one, looks like you've got one email that I haven't seen before here. So I don't know that I have the full exchange that this
Well, does this email
part of.
trouble you as much as it does members of the Judiciary Committee? That the FBI is asking for every single, I mean, we had members of Congress here that week, first time they're getting sworn in as a new member of Congress, their family in town, and you're sweeping, and they may happen to be a customer of Bank of America, and you're sweeping up every debit and credit card purchase of their family who were in town that week because their husband or their dad or their mom is getting sworn in as a new member of Congress? And then you're also saying, overlaying that information with, did this person buy a firearm?
And the question is?
I'm just nervous about that. Are you nervous about that?
As I think I've testified before, my understanding is that our engagement with Bank of America was fully lawful, but that we recalled the leads that were cut to field
Well, if it's
offices.
lawful, that was my next point. If it's lawful, why did you say we're not going to use these leads? That's what Mr. Jensen testified to when we deposed him, the director of the terrorism unit at the FBI. That's what he testified to. Why did you not use the leads if it was lawful to get the information?
Well, there are
Chairman,
plenty
it's 1 minute and 18 seconds over time.
there are plenty of times where there are things that we lawfully can do, but that we decide is better that we not do, and I think that's what happened.
The idea
there.
that Mr. Massey said earlier, the idea that this is lawful, that you can ask this is scary. This is something else we're going to have to change. With that, I would yield to the gentlelady recognize the gentlelady from, we got a unanimous consent request from Mr. Moore.
Mr. Chairman, yes, the Wall Street Journal article I'd like to enter into the record says Republicans eye sweet home for new FBI headquarters in Alabama.
All right, without objection, the chair now recognizes the gentlelady for Texas for 5 minutes, and then we'll take a break, Director.
More on that, and I'd yield the balance of my time to the chairman. Thank you.
But that's exactly what you did, and the judge said it last week. Every week you were meeting with big tech companies saying, hey, look at this. This violates your policy. Take this speech of Americans down. You were doing the same darn thing you just described the Chinese about. And can we put up the email that Mr. Nadler entered into unanimous consent request? Can we put this up from the FBI to Bank of America? Because I want to know something. This is the full email. Go to the bullet point where it says, any historical purchase going back 6 months generally for weapons-related vendor purchase. You see that, Director? You see that bullet point, the one that says any in all caps, that bullet point? This is the email. How did you know? How would you know if it's a firearm purchase? How is the FBI going to know this? Put your mic on, please.
I'm sorry. I'm not going to start engaging on specific correspondence. I don't have the whole string here. As I've said before, my understanding is that our engagement with Bank of America was lawful, but that we also took steps, as we discussed in our earlier exchange.
Well, if it's lawful, why'd you take steps not to use the material? You can't have it both ways.
I disagree with that, actually.
Really?
There are plenty of things that we lawfully can do that we decide are better not to do, and that's my understanding is what happened here.
Wow. Wow. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Texas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair now recognizes himself for an opening statement. 8 days ago, on July 4th, in the Western District of Louisiana, the court found that the federal government suppressed Americans' First Amendment free speech rights. In his conclusion on page 154, the court said this, the judge said this: plaintiffs are likely to succeed on the merits in establishing that the government has used its power to silence the opposition. Opposition to COVID-19 vaccines, opposition to COVID-19 mask and lockdowns, opposition to the lab leak theory of COVID-19, opposition to the validity of the 2020 election, opposition to President Biden's policies, statements that the Hunter Biden laptop was true, and opposition to policies of the government officials in power. All were suppressed. It is quite telling that each example or category of suppressed speech was conservative in nature. The court further writes, the United States government seems to have assumed a role similar to an Orwellian ministry of truth. Specific to the FBI, the court said this: the FBI's failure to alert social media companies that the Biden laptop story was real and not Russian disinformation is particularly troubling. The FBI had the laptop in their possession since December 2019 and had warned social media companies repeatedly to look out for, quote, hack and dump operation by the Russians prior to the 2020 election. Even after Facebook specifically asked whether the laptop story was Russian disinformation, the FBI refused to comment, resulting in social media companies' suppression of this story, and as a result, millions of our fellow citizens did not hear the story prior to the November 3rd, 2020 election. Additionally, the FBI was included in industry meetings, bilateral meetings, received and forwarded alleged misinformation to social media companies, and actually misled companies in regard to the laptop story. When the court says the FBI misled, that's a nice way of saying they lied. They lied, and as a result, important information was kept from we the people days before the most important election we have, election of President of the United States, election of the Commander-in-Chief. In a survey last fall, 4 out of 5 Americans said they believe there's a two-tiered system of justice in America today. They said that because there is. They said that because of what they've witnessed. Think about what Americans have seen. National School Board Association, left-wing political group, writes the White House and asks them to treat parents at school board meetings as terrorists. And the Garland Justice Department does just that. They put together a memo, set up a dedicated line of threat communication, a snitch line on parents. As a result, parents get investigated by our FBI, get a threat tag associated with their name, 25 of them, because whistleblowers came and told us were investigated by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Americans have seen the FBI's Richmond field office put together a memorandum saying pro-life Catholics are extremists. They've seen 20 FBI agents, SWAT team members, show up at the home of Mark Houck and arrest him in front of his wife and 7 children, even though he had indicated he'd be happy to turn himself in. And what was he arrested for? Him and his 12-year-old son were praying outside an abortion facility. Some guy starts screaming in his son's face, and he did what frankly any dad would do, defended his child. What's interesting is the National School Board Association apologized for the letter, but the Attorney General refuses to rescind his directive. The FBI did rescind, thank goodness, the Richmond Catholic Memorandum, but they refuse to tell Congress who wrote it and who approved it. And Mr. Houck, when he got his day in court, he was acquitted by a jury of his peers. American speech is censored, parents are called terrorists, Catholics are called radicals, and I haven't even talked about the spying that took place of a presidential campaign or the raiding of a former president's home. But maybe what's more frightening is what happens if you come forward and tell Congress. If you're a whistleblower, come tell the legislature, come tell the Congress what's going on. Look out. You will be retaliated against. Ask Garrett O'Boyle, who told Congress about these issues. Took his clearance, they took his pay, they took his kids' clothes. Ask Gary Shapley, 14-year veteran at the IRS, handled some of the biggest international tax fraud cases at the agency. He comes forward, and the Justice Department kicks him off the case. But here's what's truly unbelievable. Here's what's amazing. With all that history, with all that, the Justice Department and the FBI want the taxpayers they censored, the parents they labeled, the pro-life Catholics they called radical, they want them to pay for a new FBI headquarters. And they want FISA reauthorization of the 702 program in its current form. It's in the director's opening statement. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. There are 204,000 reasons why Republicans will oppose FISA reauthorization in its current form. 204,000 times the FBI improperly searched the 702 database. And unlike the FBI censorship in the court's opinion that was focused on conservatives, the FBI's illegal scrutiny wasn't just limited to conservatives. BLM supporters were illegally scrutinized by the FBI as well. And I hope our Democrat friends will join us in opposing reauthorization of Section 702 the way it's currently done. And I think they will. And I hope they will work with us in the appropriations process to stop the weaponization of the government against the American people and end this double standard that exists now in our justice system. With that, I yield to the gentleman from New York for an opening statement. What's the difference between a traditional Catholic and a radical traditional Catholic?
I'm not an expert on the Catholic orders.
Well, your FBI wrote a memo talking about radical traditional Catholics. I'm just wondering if you could define it for us.
Well, what I can tell you is you're referring to the Richmond product, which was a single product by a single field office, which as soon as I found out about it, I was aghast and ordered it withdrawn and removed from FBI systems.
You were aghast, then why won't you let us talk to the people who put it together?
We are working on finishing an internal review into what happened
We have
there.
to wait, we, the Congress, and the American people have to wait until you do an internal review. It's not a criminal investigation going on here. An internal review before we can talk to the people who wrote this?
When we finish our internal review, which will be very soon, we will come back
idea how
before
many
the
Catholics
committee
in America?
and provide a briefing on what we found.
Well, we
And
appreciate
then
the
we can-
briefing, but we want to talk to the people who wrote it. Any
then
idea
we
how
can-
many Catholics there are in America, Director?
No, sir.
There's a lot, over 60 million. What percentage of those are radical traditional Catholics, according to the Richmond Field Office of the FBI?
Again, that product is not something that I will defend or excuse. It's something that I thought was appalling and removed it.
Let's read from that product, page 4 of that product. By the way, the copy you gave us, when can we get a copy that didn't have all these redactions on it so we can actually see what the American taxpayers were paying for to see their rights, their First Amendment religious liberty rights attacked? Let me just read from page 4. Provide new opportunities to mitigate extremist threat through outreach to traditional Catholic parishes and the development of sources with the placement and access to report on places of worship. That's pretty fancy language for they're trying to put informants in the parish, in the church. That's what this memorandum said, Director, from one of your field offices. And you won't let us talk to the people who did it. Any response to that?
I didn't know. I was waiting for the question.
No, you think priests should be informants inside the church, Director?
We do not recruit, open, or operate confidential human sources to infiltrate, target, report
But that's not
on
what this,
religious
that's not what this
organizations.
said. It sounds like you were trying to do it in Richmond, Virginia.
No, sir. No,
You
sir.
weren't? This didn't happen? You can assure us that this didn't happen?
That product did not, to as best as we can tell, result in any investigative action as a result of it. None.
You know what the motivation for this was? Why would they even think about doing this? You know what the motivation was?
Well, again, I think that's what our internal review will find, and I'd rather wait until I hear what the results of that internal
Well, I don't need an
review are.
internal review. I can read the document. I assume you can do the same, because it says right there on the same page. Richmond assesses extremist interest in radical traditional Catholics is likely to increase over the next 12 to 24 months in the run-up to the next general election. Same paragraph. Events in which extremists and radical traditional Catholics might have common cause include legislation, judicial decisions in such areas as abortion rights, immigration, affirmative action, and LGBTQ protections. It's politics. That's the motivation. In the run-up to the next election, and they talk about the border, affirmative action, and abortion rights, it's total politics. I mean, I think it's interesting that we just got a decision from a bunch of Catholics who sit on the United States Supreme Court relative to affirmative action. Politics was the total motivation here, and that's what's scary. That's what's, I think, so frightening, and how this happens, I don't know. And 5 people signed off on it. 5 people, including the Chief Division Counsel at the Richmond Field Office. I'd like to talk to this lawyer. mean, a lot of people in this room went to law school, get a course on the Constitution, talks about the First Amendment. I find that really scary. Again, when do you think we're going to have a chance? How soon are you going to complete this internal investigation so we can talk to these folks who put this together?
I expect us to be able to brief the committee on our internal review later this summer.
Will that briefing include the names of the individuals who put this document together attacking Americans' First Amendment liberty?
I'm not sure yet what it'll include because it's not done yet, but when it is, we'll provide you with an appropriate briefing.
What are you doing to fix it so this doesn't happen again?
Well, we've already started putting in place a number of fixes, and those will be further informed by the results of the review.
What are those fixes? More training, more things, more. That's that same thing you told us on FISA. And while you may have some improvement, you still got 204,000 times the database was illegally searched. So what are the training and procedures you're putting in place?
Well, I'll put the FISA stuff to the side.
Oh, I'm just using that as an example of where you've told us the same thing, you fixed something and you haven't.
I do not believe the number that you just invoked on the FISA side is since the reforms, the fixes, as you called them.
Can we get an unredacted?
Those post-date the numbers that you're referring to.
Director, can we get an unredacted copy while you're still doing this internal investigation? Can we at least get an unredacted copy of this memorandum?
I will find out if there's more of the document that can be shared with you. We've tried to be very careful in what we redact, and there's always a basis for it. So let me go back and see if there's more that we can provide. But I know my instructions are to be as sparing as possible in the redactions that we provide.
It's back, Director. We appreciate those. The whole country does. In fact, I said this in an interview this morning, at a TV interview this morning. As two of those agents who served for years in the FBI did great work. Now work for the committee on the Republican staff, and we appreciate the work they did then, the work they're doing now. But they share the same concerns raised by members of the committee. That's why they came to work for us. So I just got a couple other questions. Any of the FBI personnel who did improper queries of the 702 database, have any of those individuals lost their clearance?
Well, we had, depends on how far back you want to go in time. We've had individuals, if you go back to, say, like 2018, I think was the last I remember, where you had somebody who engaged in intentional conduct and the person, for example, is gone. I think there were security clearances revoked for people back in that time period, but I don't know that we've had somebody who's engaged in, intentional or reckless conduct more recently than that. We have, as you may know, Mr. Chairman, and this actually didn't come up today, but it's important for people to know. We recently put in place a whole new set of accountability policies specifically focused on 702. They go through cascading consequences.
Yep.
And so that's an important
It's been reported that donors of a congressional member of Congress were illegally searched. Has that individual lost their clearance?
I'm not sure I'm familiar with the specific example. So,
Well, it's been widely reported that the donor base for a member of Congress has been searched, and I just wonder if the person responsible for that has had any consequences, like a loss of a security clearance.
I don't know the answer.
Okay. Is the FBI assisting the Secret Service in the investigation as to how cocaine wound up at the White House?
Yes, I want to be a little bit careful about what I can say here because the Secret Service is leading the investigation. But as is standard in an investigation where white powder is found, the FBI's lab personnel did an evaluation to determine whether or not there was a sort of biological.
Is that the only assistance?
That's the only assistance we've done so far. We have offered the full range of our assistance to the Secret Service. If they want to use us for that purpose. But beyond that, I would refer you to the Secret Service.
Is that offer's been denied? Is that what you're saying?
No, I didn't say that. We've offered it to the Secret Service,
Okay.
but beyond that, I would refer to them.
In October of 2020, when Facebook asked the FBI, is the Biden laptop story Russian disinformation? The FBI's answer was no comment. Who gave that answer?
And before you answer, sir, if I might just interject the fact that we agreed that I would have 2 questions and you would have 2 questions.
I think I said a couple questions.
Yeah, and you've asked a couple.
In fact, I don't
with
think. I know I said a
several
couple questions.
subparts.
But I gave you 5 minutes, so.
But I'll.
Do you want another question?
No,
Okay.
I want us to conclude this hearing, and I
And
respect
we will be
your
done in 2
prerogative as
minutes
the
and
chair.
10 seconds.
Thank you.
We appreciate that. and we obviously appreciate the director being here. In October 2020, when Facebook asked FBI, is the Biden laptop story Russian disinformation, the FBI's response was no comment. Do you know who gave that response?
I did not.
The court knew, and the court said it was Laura Demlow. Do you know who Laura Demlow is?
I do know who Laura Demlow is.
And what does she do?
Laura Demlow is an agent in our counterintelligence division, and she currently works with the Foreign Influence Task Force.
Doesn't she head the Foreign Influence Task Force?
I think she leads it, yeah.
She leads the Foreign Influence Task Force. Did you tell her to give that comment?
Did I what now?
Did you instruct anyone, when Facebook asked, did you instruct them to give the no comment?
I don't remember giving any instruction along those lines, although I should say I'm not sure whether Laura Demlow was in that role at the time frame that you described, but
Again, the court in Louisiana said she was, and said when Facebook asked her specifically, she said no comment. And this is the Foreign Influence Task Force leader, Foreign Influence Task Force that you created as director of the FBI, correct?
I'm sorry.
All that's correct. You created the Foreign Influence Task Force.
I did create the Foreign Influence
Yeah,
Task
you put
Force.
that together, and she heads it up. Okay. When did you become, how did you become aware of the Catholic memo? The one in Richmond that we've talked about a couple times today.
As I recall, in one of my regular morning meetings, I learned that there was this product, and that was the same day that I ordered that it be removed.
Was that before or after it was already in the press?
That I can't tell you. My guess is it was probably around the same time, but I don't know.
Did you learn about it? Did the people who brought it up to you, did they learn about it from the press, or was it some internal communication?
I can't speak to how they learned about it. I just know that I was told about it by them, and we had a conversation about immediately taking steps that we then did.
We appreciate that. Yeah. Okay, Director, we appreciate your time today. I know it's been a long day. We already had the unanimous consent from Mr. Gates, so the committee is adjourned.
For 5 minutes.
Ms. Carnahan, was Director Wray wrong when he said he didn't agree with the process that was followed in selecting the site in Maryland?
I asked my general counsel to look into all of the concerns that were raised in Director Wray's letter, and they found those to be without merit.
He says, we have concerns about fairness and transparency in the process and GSA's failure to adhere to its own site selection plan. So he didn't just say there were problems. He said you didn't follow your own rules. And you say that's not true?
Our general counsel found that we did follow all of the rules.
What do you say? You're the boss.
I agree that we followed all of the rules.
So Senator Kane's wrong as well when he says irrevocably undermined and tainted, and this decision must be reversed. He's wrong as well?
Look, there are a lot of people who are interested in where this site goes. We ran the most fair and
Well, I'm interested too. I don't want it to go either place. I don't think we should be rewarding the FBI with the same FBI that said pro-life Catholics were extremists, the same FBI that retaliated against whistleblowers, the same FBI that censored Americans. That's not Jim Jordan. We know this. We've seen the domain perspective about what happened at the Richmond FBI. We've had whistleblower testimony in front of Congress telling about how they've been retaliated against. And we know they censored Americans. The Fifth Circuit told us that. So I don't want it to go to either place. Frankly, if it goes anywhere, it should go to Huntsville, where they already got all kinds of land, all kinds of space, and all kinds of operations. But I am concerned about this process. How long did Ms. Albert have the position where she could overrule the three-person panel? How long was she in that position?
So Ms. Albert was the head of the Public Building Service for GSA. She was in that position for, I think, 2 years. We made the decision.
How long has she been at GSA?
I believe she started in July of 2021.
Okay, so she was there a couple years? But she's recently left?
Correct.
And she left before the decision was made public, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. So you say that Senator Kane is wrong in his assessment and Director Wray is wrong in his assessment as well?
We ran a fair and transparent process, Congressman. That was my directive to our team, and we did that in the extreme. Every document that we've used to make any of these decisions is available online. I would encourage you to take a look at those.
Correct me, maybe I'm wrong, but didn't a three-person panel looked at all of this and they made a decision, And then that was overruled by Ms. Albert, who had been at GSA for all of 2 years. And then she left. After she overruled, she left before you guys make the decision public. Isn't that how it played out?
So I want to just focus on a term that you're using, and that is overruled. The normal process for GSA when it makes site selections is to have a panel that makes some recommendations. They look at a lot of things and they recommend. But we then have the senior real estate professional at the agency make an ultimate decision. In fact, sometimes those decisions are different. The interesting thing is
How often have they been different?
the most interesting thing is that in this case,
How many times has this happened where the panel suggests one thing, recommends one thing, and then one individual who's in this position that Ms. Albert had comes in and overrules? How often does that
well,
happen?
let me tell you the most relevant time that
No, that's not what I ask. I ask how often has it happened?
So I'll have to get back to you on that number, but there is a very
Is
relevant
it rare?
situation.
Is it often? Is it all the time? What is? Can you give me that?
In this particular project, it happened. Because in 2014, when all of the sites were looked at originally, there was a panel. It down-selected dozens of sites to 3. All 3 were in Maryland.
Okay.
The Site Selection Authority, over that, the equivalent of Miss Albert, decided that wasn't right and picked 2 in Maryland and 1 in Virginia, the site in Springfield. So in this project, there is a history.
That still begs the
of
question
this
I'm
happening.
asking. So you've had it happen twice in the same project. How often does it happen anywhere else? That's an important answer for us to have. And when we're evaluating how you did this, particularly in light of what the chairman and Mr. Conley just said, that there's going to, and I assume the ranking member agrees with this too, there's going to be an inspector general investigation in all this. So we kind of like to know that answer. It's pretty important fact. If you say if it only has happened twice and it happened on the same issue, this FBI headquarters, which many of us on this side don't want going to either Maryland or Virginia, frankly, in light of what the FBI has been up to regarding the American people, that's pretty important. And I agree with the chairman. I think an inspector general investigation is exactly what is needed to get to the bottom of this. And if we find out this hardly ever happens, but happened twice with the FBI headquarters, holy cow, that I think tells us something in and of itself. None of my time has expired, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen.